have joining us today, the thought of not saying this, but I am going to say it, the brain behind it all, Dr. Etienne van der Walt, the CEO of Neurozone. Dr. van der Walt is an internationally renowned clinical neurologist who has spent decades simplifying and then researching the complexity of the brain to help business leaders to understand resilience and how it impacts on performance. And joining him, we've got Marina Pretorius, who is a registered IO psychologist who has extensive experience serving on the exco of multiple corporates, including Siemens and EOH, for example. But not only does she have management experience, she is well known for coaching and a very skilled facilitator. And I mean, applying psychometric assessments in general is second nature. Now, Marina found her magic wand with the Neurozone assessment, which she had perfected the application for. So I wanted to say there's nobody better than Marina to talk about the how of the assessment. But before we get to that, I do want you to think of questions that you want to ask her. And as I said, please, you can start populating the chat box as well. But before we get to Marina in terms of how, I think it's important for us to start with Dr. van der Walt to explain to us the what and the why behind the Neurozone assessment. So on that note, thank you again, Etienne, Marina, for being here. And over to you, Etienne.
Thanks, Jani. That's really great to be here. And if you do see a bit of sweat, it is no delusion. I'm sitting in a very warm Western Cape in load shedding. I also know that some of our colleagues and partners are in the same boat, so all of the best to you too. Great to be with you all. Yeah, maybe I can just start by saying that. Ingra, I'm going to say it now, but Ingra Dubisson-Narsai is joining us as well today. Ingra, I just heard this morning that Ingra is now a Dr. Dubisson-Narsai. So congratulations to you, Ingra. It's wonderful. And also the reason I'm actually, there are two reasons actually why I'm so overcome by this is that I was very privileged to be one of your supervisors. And but I was on the neuroscience side, and it was actually the neuroscience of leadership. And the reason it's useful is because it's a great segue into this conversation. We are all about the science, and so Ingrid, it was a great privilege to actually journey this with you, to learn a bit more with you, because I think I actually learned more than I actually supported you or helped you. I hope the support was something of value. But real congratulations to you, and it's a wonderful achievement, and I think a great contribution that you're making to this field of applied brain science.
Thank you, Etienne. Thank you so much. And you are a true master of your trade. We're honored to have you. Yeah.
I paid you to say that, right? Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Right, so this is actually, I thought I see many familiar names and faces, but I also see unfamiliar people. And I think that's important. So thanks. It's great to see many of you again who we know well. We've been journeying even across the globe. I see names, and it's wonderful to see you here. Thank you so much for joining. We also have to understand that that there are people who actually don't know anything about Neurozone potentially. And so I actually want to start from the start, and I'll try to make it as interesting as possible for those of you who've heard this before. But I also think that there is some new relevance. The new relevance is that we are living in a very rapidly accelerating world. It's chaos out there. And I don't have to tell you about the so-called mental pandemic. And we may truly call this now a mental pandemic that is spreading across the globe. The effects of depression, anxiety, of burnout in the workplace, of insomnia, and a number of other mental dysfunction. So the whole idea of mental health being at the forefront, at the brunt, and incredibly important for us to take notice of, but at the same time, actually to really understand how do we actually protect ourselves against this from an individual, but also right through to a systemic perspective is critical. And so I'm going to tell you the story again within that backdrop. That's a different sea we're swimming in, I think, from where we started out 10 years ago. And it was only 10 years ago when we started out as a research company. So, and the story goes a bit like this. It's so relevant today. You know, I spent years practicing as a clinical neurologist, seeing many patients who actually shared an interesting common syndrome. And these were patients actually from the Netherlands, the UK, South Africa. So it was pretty much a widespread, where I spent time working in different practices and academic hospitals. And the common syndrome that they actually shared was they had hyperventilation syndrome. They were hyperventilating. And they were also shared a number of other common denominators. One of them was they were very successful people. They were business people. They were leaders in businesses. They were professionals. And they were colleagues. And so these individuals came to a neurologist because they had specific manifestations, so to speak, of this particular syndrome. So they didn't feel anxious and, you know, and had anxiety attacks and so forth. And so it was not actually appropriate, so to speak. So they were sent by the general practitioner to a neurology practice to say, hey, here's a problem. This patient is having a bouts of faintness, loss of consciousness, weak arm, weak leg, something that suggests there's something wrong in the brain. And please scan and assess, is there a tumor or something else that's pending here and imminent. And so fortunately, these patients all had what I could call therapeutic scans, because they feel much better after the scan. They start breathing a bit slower, so they feel better. And the scans were normal, but they had markers of inflammation. And so just to make a long story short, these individuals were actually having markers of inflammation because their brain-body system was effectively imploding. They started to decompensate because of the continuous stresses in the workplace, in their lives in general. And this was more than 15 years ago already. And I can share this with you. 15 years ago, when I started working with these patients who basically all had chronic stress and were burning out and then effectively imploded, they you know, that mindfulness, there were almost no studies on mindfulness. The studies on mindfulness were 6 to 8 hour meditation, meditating individuals in Nepal that were studied, and the effects on their brains, and it showed some changes in brain changes. Now, nobody in this world will, you know, have the time to go and meditate 8 hours or so. Of course, today we've got much more than that. But just to give, once again, just to suggest just to share the thought with you that we've had a massive explosion of things, of what matters, of the so-called neurobehaviors and the states and traits that is now known to us, that are critical to actually ensure that we not only stay alive, but also survive and thrive in life. Long story short, again, I treated these patients with a few tablets to actually prove it to them. No one believed that they actually are just breathing too fast and they're blowing down their carbon dioxide, and therefore they are starting to feel so iffy and unwell. But of course, that tablet worked like a charm, and 2 weeks later, they all reported back and said, yeah, this works. No, I believe you. And we started working on the real issue. And the real issue was in a field called psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, psychoneuroimmunology. Sometimes people talk about psychoneuroendocrinology. This is the field, the axis that is so critical and such a wonderful field that's developing today across silos, across different conventional silos of neurology, neuropsychology, psychology, etc., to understand how you and I interpret the external world, how that affects our behavior, and how that affects our neurology, so psychoneurology, so to speak, and how that actually through the brain-body system affects the immune system and everything else that actually looks after us to ensure that we stay alive, survive, and thrive in life. And this is all one living entity. It's a living system. And in this field, it lies the answers. to a number of the questions of why we are burning out in the world today. By the way, as you know, just a quick number, I've seen two different studies. One was done by Asana recently, published in Forbes magazine, but another study recently looking at, for example, entrepreneurs. It's another Gallup study at entrepreneurs, and both of them report over 70%. In fact, 74%, I think, was the Asana study, and the one by Gallup, 75% burnout among people in 9 different countries of note. So it's important to really recognize this as a massive problem. And the answers lie in this whole axis, the psychoneuroimmunology axis when it comes to the individual. Of course, there are way more things. We are swimming in a sea, we are working in a system, and there are many things that impact us from the external environment. But at the end, how you interpret the information and how you assign values to it and how you then deal with that, your whole system, is at the core of what then leads to the next phase, which could be good or bad inflammation in your brain-body system. And good inflammation ensures that you thrive in life and keeps you in a baseline, relaxed physiological state, which is a state for longevity and a state of well-being and a state of thriving, so therefore. Whereas a bad inflammatory state does quite the opposite. It means that you are not in a baseline, relaxed physiological state, and you are not ready to perform at your best, and downstream things start to go wrong, meaning that it starts to bring out the cancers and the other multi-system disorders, for example, way sooner, decades sooner than it probably would have happened due to your genetics. And so this is something that really needs to be taken into account and actually really be pondered upon. The solution for the problem, and now I'm fast forwarding right out of the practice, Neurozone was born because of the different kind of interventions that I started using with these individuals. And it worked. They didn't only move out of their state of under the line, so to speak, under the line of dysfunction, but they also started reporting clarity of mind, more time to make decisions, sharpness, better relationships with their families, their spouses, and with their work people. Now that's a big mouthful. So what they started to actually report back was a state of high performance. And so the axis of right from death to high performance, you can see, is one continuum. And over time, Neurozone then started working, this is where Neurozone was born, started working on the solution to actually keep us at the top of the axis, and that is resilience. And so resilience as a complex adaptive capability and the neurobiological capacity, and specifically psychological resilience, is what Neurozone have been working on over the last decade. And in the last 7 years ago, I commissioned the team to go and look for the best psychological resilience assessment that is out there. And we couldn't find any assessment that was really applicable for, call it the whole world. In South Africa, we have the whole world. We've got people from all the different socioeconomic backgrounds. And we then set about working with the University of Cape Town down in South Africa to develop a new psychological resilience index, which we today call the Neurozone Resilience Index. It takes 3 minutes to assess. You can check it out on the website. If you haven't been there, you can do it for free quickly. Just register and do the assessment yourself, and you will land on a dashboard where you'll actually get your resilience and see your resilience. It takes 3 minutes to do. And it measures us along three major axes, and that is stress mastery, positive affect, and your own perception of your early life stability, which is a dynamic state, and interesting enough, actually moves up and down as we become more or less resilient, which is quite fascinating. And this has been well studied, validated, and is reliable. It's been published in the academic journal of testing, or I think the International Journal of Testing. My apologies. That's the journal in which it was published. And today we have got, and I think many of you actually, names I know, probably don't know about all the developments. We are continuously unraveling new, incredible, valuable correlations, predictive value for the Neurozone Resilience Index as it relates, especially to depression, to anxiety, to insomnia, to burnout risk, but also to a lesser degree, because we're not actually focusing on that at the moment, but also to a lesser degree on engagement, turnover intention, absenteeism, performance outcomes that are important within the corporate well-being space. So Neurozone the resilience index is a very good, reliable indicator of the capacity to overcome challenges, using our knowledge, our skills, expertise, and experience to overcome those challenges and grow through that. It has been well anchored into its predictive value of mental health. It also has a biological we also actually bio-anchored it into cortisol a number of years ago, because I'm a neurologist, I'm not a psychologist, so I actually want to see something happening in the serum as well. And so we did a bit of work in that space as well. And now the question is, well, if you know how to measure this, it takes 3 minutes, what do you do? And so, as you know, we now studied numbers of neurobehaviors, 59 of them, neurobehaviors, emotional states, cognitive states, and also our behaviors, rhythms, and so forth. And all of those have been quantified, and we now have a system that can actually reliably tell you which one of these, or which number, how these behaviors in the form of develop or optimization paths actually can build your resilience and increase it. So you get the best or the highest yield for the energy you assigned to task is the number 1 to 59. And you can actually then decide how you want to actually use these huge number of neurobehaviors at your disposal to increase your resilience. It makes sense, right? Because we are complex adaptive. If we had only one thing that we all need to do now, we would have demised. There's no such thing. We are complex, we're adaptive. Therefore, many different things that we have at our disposal that we can work on to build and increase resilience. And once you have that, you can see the whole picture falling into place. If you can assess resilience and you can assess all these neurobehaviors, you know its effect on the impact on mental health, then the next question is, let's measure this and let's find ways to optimize. And of course, this is where the rest of the process, where our assessments come from, where the individual assessment comes from. The individual assessment we're focusing on today in 2 formats, specifically in a web-based assessment, which is a 20 to 25-minute assessment that can be accessed online and just gives a report only, as opposed to the app, where you have a journey, which actually also provides you with those outcomes with a report, a PDF report that is emailed into your inbox, but also then takes you on a journey where you can decide which paths you want to optimize and work on, etc. These are the 2 assessments that actually is based on this foundation that we've been building on for 10 years. I finally just have to say a very important thing, and then I'm going to hand over, and I'm sure there'll be a panel discussion and many other things, because I feel I want to say 100 things still. Very important to understand is that for coaches, these assessments are wonderful for coaches to use. It's also great for coaches to use the app. I know that we've got coaches who said and told us the app is actually taking over the coach. But it's quite the contrary, which we experience, is that coaches use the app and use the assessment to great effect once they actually become quite used to it and quite au fait with the tools. On that note, I think the rest of what we want to discuss maybe is up to the panel. Back to you, Jan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Etienne. Really appreciate it. I can imagine. I listened to one or two of your presentations before, and there's a million things to say. I think to have 20 minutes to try and explain the complexity of what, and the research and the depth of what you guys have done the past 10 years is more than 10 years is impossible. I do, however, want to for a second start asking a few questions. The one question that I thought of starting with is now changing. Sorry, Marina. I do want to ask Etienne just quickly, with the background of your background and the development that you've gone through with creating this assessment, can you ever be coined as resilient? Is there an end point to it, or is it that theory of constraints? If you've worked on this section, then there's another area that you need to now start working on it. Is there an end point that you can get to?
Sure, we can become very philosophical about the term resilience, right? And also the way that we are interconnected into a resilient ecosystem. Because the whole ecosystem as a living, breathing entity, so to speak, that you and I form fractals of, is also at play, right? And one of the fields that we really bring into the understanding of what we are building and try to provide for enhancement and optimization is this idea that we are part of a living, breathing system, and that individuals consist of living cells, living organs, living systems, bodily systems, and then the organism is just another organ of the team and the family and so forth, right? And right to the organization with capital organ, and then right into what we can't see, quite mystic, but still doesn't make it less real. And I think the idea that we are part of an ecosystem that continues, that actually need to be resilient within parameters that we don't understand, in that sense, makes things extremely, what is the word? Continuous flux, and equilibrium is continuously, I think, something which needs to be attained. And if there's an equilibrium, it means that there's a living, continuous external pressures, stresses that push us out of that, and then we have to correct for that. So, and I think that's just a way that we complex adapt continuously. Now, to that point, therefore, and then, of course, just another little remark on that question is the point that resilience, you're also resilient for something. So we are quite, we try to be synthesizing as opposed to analyzing. We try to say we are not reductionists at Neurozone. We try to be holistic about things. At the same time, we do have to understand things by sort of looking at pieces and always try to see how it fits into the whole. If you think about pieces, you and I are resilient for something. It's always for something that's in your path at the moment. And so my question is, if you are resilient, what is it resilient for what? And to what extent are you resilient enough for what comes? And so we often talk about one thing, and that is collective resilience is what is really essential, because we simply don't have enough individual resilience to be able to overcome all the challenges that's coming our way around the corner tomorrow and the day after that, because of the world's rapid accelerated change. So to that point, John, it's a very important question. And so resilience, therefore, never stops being important. It's critical to continue to build my resilience as an individual, but at the same time, also pay attention to the collective resilience that I actually plug into.
Oh, thank you, Etienne. I appreciate that. I think, yes, again, it's a topic in and of itself. But I think let's just maybe get back to Marina. Thank you for joining as well. Michelle, I do see your hand being up. I'm going to start with one question, then hand over to Michelle's question. Marina, the first question that I would have for you, knowing that you're an absolute expert, you've used many different assessments before. We as JVR know that there are, one or two assessments in the market that measures resilience, but it measures resilience in a completely different manner as to what Neurozone does. Maybe from your perspective, what makes the Neurozone assessment different to other psychometric assessments that you've used and are still using?
Thanks, Yoni. I think the first thing for me that drew me to the Neurozone Personal Assessment is the fact that it actually combines two assessments in one, if you think about it. The one is this pure measure of resilience, psychological resilience, as Etienne has explained it, and it's come from a very rigorous literature review and a conceptualization of resilience. So as a psychologist, I could relate to that as, that's how I know resilience. And it was broadened to include lower income populations as well. So it's not just, people who can be resilient because they have access to resources. But so on the one hand, it's this pure measure of resilience, if I can say, as we know it. But then it also measures the neurobehaviors that Etienne has referred to, these research that has gone into what are these things we need to do to optimize our brain-body system so that we can get to that baseline relaxed physiological state. And those behaviors, the framework around it, the 59 behaviors that is currently in the framework, really spans behaviors that we as psychologists and coaches and people development people know to be the right things to do. We have the rhythms domain, you know, that talks about sleeping, eating, mindfulness, nutrition, things like that. Then it talks about connector behavior. So those are all about your belonging and your trust at work and at home with friends and family. So it's almost your EQ kind of domain, the interpersonal behaviors that's important. There's the energy domain that's about, you know, how we look at the world, what are the types of emotions we experience, do we practice things like gratitude and like forgiveness. And then there's the transformers domain that talks about your mindset and how you look at things. What are the filters that you use to filter information so that you can stay in touch with reality best. And then lastly, there's the innovators domain, which talks about, or which specifies some behaviors about how we solve problems. So if you think about the breadth of that framework, it really encapsulated a lot of good behaviors and habits that we as people need to practice. The Neurozone system links it then to brain-body optimization, which gives a very nice holistic framework. And then it links it to this really what we call the bedrock of well-being, resilience, from a psychological perspective. And that just made so much sense to me to say, how can we practically change certain behaviors to move the dial up on our resilience? And what is great about the assessment itself, it doesn't just give you the 59 behaviors and tell you this is what's good and this is what's not so good. It actually ranks it for you in what are you currently doing well that is building your resilience. So keep on doing it and keep at it. But then it ranks the top 6 behaviors for you about what will build your resilience. So based on your score, based on a weighting that the research have determined, it gives a prioritized version for you individually on what will build your resilience. And that's, I think, the big differentiator from other resilience assessments out there, is that it looks, yes, at the pure construct, but in a wider sense to what will build it from this psychoimmunological perspective.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Marina. Now, I've not been certified in the assessment myself, just for the audience to know as well. But to some extent, my understanding from where I'm sitting is very much, we tend as psychologists to focus on the clarity of a construct and be so clearly, so that it's so clearly defined, so that you make sure of your measurement properties and the depth and the quality of how you measure that one thing. But then what sometimes happens is we isolate that something that we actually lose track of everything that's related. On the one hand, it's like a feeding scheme. You can't get kids being taught maths at school if they didn't have something to eat. You need to make sure that the system is in a way functioning to enforce that learning and development can take place. And that's not only one thing. That talks to exercise and mindfulness and so many, as you now mentioned, from emotional, behavioral, so many aspects that talks to being able to become resilient or respond to certain situations. So I think that's really what makes this, in my mind, quite unique as well. We've definitely not come across something that is as broad of a measurement that we're aware of. Michelle, I know that you may have wanted to respond to Etienne's comment. Just when I said to you that I'm going to take just my question first, just want to double check. Your hand was up. Am I correct in saying that you wanted to respond to Etienne?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to ask a very small, quick question, but if there isn't time, then I understand.
No, please do. This is panel.
Okay.
It's supposed to be asking questions.
It's not necessarily test specific. I just wanted to ask there's been a lot of, let's call it pop culture psychology that's gone into burnout. And I feel like these days, every second person has burnout. And I just feel like it's classified, I don't know what you would call it, an illness or a something that someone's going through. That's really, it's not just you don't just have burnout because you had a long day. And I was just wondering what your take is on that, and if the test then, if it does measure burnout, because I think there was something on burnout, does it take in the clinical aspects of burnout that will actually then maybe, I know some people that have burnout are hospitalized even, so it's an intense, I'm not sure what the term is for it, but it's quite intense. So I feel like there's actually not a lot of people that may actually experience the full-on burnout. So I was just wondering about that.
Thank you, Michelle. Etienne.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, very important. So first of all, we do not measure burnout. What we do, however, in our in our research side, we do measure burnout risk, but we don't measure it as in our commercial system. So effectively, what we do is when you use the assessment, it assesses your resilience and it assesses your behaviors and states, and then. But what it also implicit has built in is that the value of the resilience index then has a specific predictive value for specific populations as we do it, as we research that in research settings. And we continue to do that so that we actually say this is the relevance of this particular score. And the resilience score has got 5 bands and cut-off scores as well. So the cut-off high, cut-off low. If you're in a low resilience, there are 5 bands. There's low, there's cut, there's high, and then you have moderate, a high moderate, low moderate, and then a moderate itself. If you're in the low band, you are such a risk for having a mental disorder or developing it that we actually recommend counseling. We don't recommend coaching. And then, of course, there's specific recommendations, practical recommendations based on that resilience score with its predictive values, one of them being burnout risk. But we don't measure burnout as such. The MASLAC is still a very good way of measuring burnout. If you want to look at the MASLAC index, burnout itself is a very important condition. It's a syndrome. It's recognized as a medical syndrome by the World Health Organization almost just before COVID. That was already being proclaimed. It's exactly the demarcations of what it is, what it means. What types of burnout do we have? What are the risks of certain types of burnout? Currently, it's just a syndrome. Now, remember, a syndrome is a constellation of symptoms and signs that's shared. But many different diseases, conditions, can actually result within that syndrome. So, for example, hyperventilation is a syndrome, the one that I just started telling you about. But one of the conditions that can give us hyperventilation could be anxiety disorder. But burnout can do it as well. But within burnout, then there's another set of potential disorders. Now, a very good example of a syndrome, just to be very quick on that, is, for example, anemia. You could have iron deficiency anemia, or you could be pregnant. You could also have anemia, but that doesn't mean that you have iron deficiency. Same with vitamin B12 and so forth. So you can see that anemia is a syndrome, and then the particular condition is what causes that constellation of findings. And this is what's currently known as burnout. But it makes it it's still a syndrome with conditions within it. And there's a clear way of diagnosing burnout currently, and I can promise you tomorrow it's going to be today is going to be muddy. But clear currently in our heads is that there are specific set of things over time. It's temporal, but also things that need to develop. Overwhelmedness in the workplace, continuous, and then a process of disengagement, cynicism, and then specifically. So these are specific, very non-specific symptoms on its own, but within a temporal context, and if you have them in a combination, it starts to give you the picture with rather great accuracy. So I think it's important to understand we are not experts in diagnosing burnout. We are experts in preventing it by building resilience, and I think that's important to make that demarcation. But we do have to study that as well. Michelle, was that adequate enough? But it's a very important question.
Yes. Thank you so much. I understand now.
Thank
But
you.
I agree with you. It's a very, very dangerous condition. Thank you, Donnie.
Out of interest, you refer to the bottom band being something that would require therapy, and then possibly above that one can actually increase your resilience or prevent burnout via coaching. Out of interest, how regularly would you actually assess to see fluctuation, or how often do you see changes in somebody's resilience?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the answer lies in the idea of states and traits. Remember that if we measure heart rate variability, so let's say you put your wearable on and now you check your HRV. Now, the heart rate variability is a pretty good indication of a baseline relaxed physiological state. But it's not of a state. It's actually where you are in that moment. And in that moment, that can change. It can change on a daily basis. Resilience is a psychological entity, a construct, a construct made of these items, is something that changes over time and provides you with, effectively, we're measuring a state. If you measure a state, you should probably repeat this between 4 and 6 weeks. And this is why we've got a recommendation around the resilience index itself, that it should be ideally somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. So we actually remind users who are on our on the resilience pulse dashboard system, for example, every month, hey, time to have it, just have to see what's happening with your resilience, because it's a dynamic process. It continuously changes, and you can see how it shifts, and it gives you a picture over time. So therefore, that's 4 to 6 weeks. And so we are not measuring the trait, we're measuring the state. Trait, of course, takes longer, and to start developing through things called epigenetics and so forth in our system.
Very interesting. And that question, your answer actually brought me to the next question, Marina, that I think I want to ask you. Talking about state and trait, knowing that we often, as JVR, are very well known for personality assessments and EQ assessments and other psychometric assessments we use. Out of interest, when you refer to the neurozone assessment as a state, and then thinking of something like a personality assessment, do you ever make use of both, and how?
I would love Marina also to give her input here. I'll be very quick. We currently don't, but we always wanted to, because and I would say there's always the intention to do that over time. If you think about, we usually used, I think for those of you who've been familiar with the Neurozone system, we at some point when in the training as well, you'll see that we use what we call it the house slide. And the house slide actually is like, you've got these 2 pillars and they've got something in the middle, and then you've got this little sort of roof on top. What you have in these little blocks, 3 blocks underneath, represents our personality trait, our personalities and our preferences is one. And the other hand, there's our talents, our innate strengths, and so forth. And then there's in the center, there's something we call brain performance. Now, basically, what we just say is that we actually all do the following in an ideal world. In an ideal world, we use our skills, our knowledge, skills, expertise, and our experience that is being built on our talents, innate talents, and we express that in life, in teams, and so forth, based on our personalities and our preferences. But we all do the same thing. Then we solve problems and we fashion novel products that are adaptive for the group. And solving problems and fashioning novel products that are adaptive for the group is the neuroscientific definition of creativity. So creativity in the neuroscience sense is exactly that. It's to actually use that knowledge and skills, expertise, experience to solve problems. And there you got the 2 horses of the cart called resilience. So that's resilience in action. And then where we apply ourselves within the group and within the world, of course, that's the personality states and personalities and cognitive styles and preferences. So it's an interesting way that this all work together, and they must work together. And if you think about it, so Marina, what do you think? I think we should just, and I know Jana, you're also interested in this. There must be something that can actually really be much more personalized, right?
Yeah. I'm going to take the very practical practitioner's role and put that hat on when I answer this question, because I think what I hear in your question, Yanni, is, when will you use this assessment versus a personality assessment or another assessment? How will it fit into a battery of assessments? Or when will you use it alone? And I think you know, as any good practitioner of assessments will start off, is what is the purpose of your assessment? You know, what do you want to know from the person or the group that you are working with, and what do you want to do with the results of it? So personally, I've used it in a team context where we wanted a project team that was going to work together for a long time under a lot of pressure. We wanted to use assessments to start with that forming phase of the team where they need to get to know themselves and each other better. So I used the MBTI, for instance, you know, from a personality perspective to give language around behaviors around personality. But then we used the Neurozone assessment to start giving people insight into their own resilience, because we knew that was something that was going to be under pressure. And we wanted to introduce the whole wellness and well-being as what ultimately became a culture element, because, you know, big projects over a long time tends to be characterized by a lot of unhealthy behaviors, and we proactively wanted to counter that. So to answer your question practically, yes, it can be used with other instruments, but each instrument has its purpose. And the purpose of the Neurozone Personal Assessment will focus in a battery like that on giving someone personal insight into their resilience, but also insight into what are those behaviors for them that they can work on and develop. We then went on in a team context and said, okay, let's start sharing our scores and our ratings, you know, on the behavior side, not on the resilience side, but on the behaviors. Now, who scored for exercise and sleep and etc., which was in itself, can I say, a vulnerable experience for people at times, because those are not the type of things we necessarily talk about at work. Yeah. It's become more, you know, I think usual to talk about it, but at that stage still it was, you know, you wouldn't talk about your exercise schedule or your sleeping, etc. So we use that also as a team bonding and sharing information about each other, get a common framework or a common reference for the team. And we plan the team interventions and the team activities around things that will enhance the neurobehaviors. So, for instance, got the team to exercise together, those that wanted, you know, and encourage that and acknowledge that, but also encourage courageous conversations to work at those relationships. And like I mentioned, eventually we work towards if you wanted to put it on an organizational level for this large team, which was about 60 people, we wanted that to become part of the culture of how this team operates, so that they would err on the side of the healthy behaviors and the healthy choices more than to the others, because it's become a team culture and something that we talk about, that we endorse, that we encourage, etc. So, yeah, the purpose of the assessment will have its place, but then it also has a wide application on how you.
There's so many things that you just now said. So, and Catherine, I did see your question as well, which we'll get to in a second, as well as the adult or the children version of this, which I also absolutely was also interested in the answer. But just wanted to comment, Marina. On the one hand, I absolutely agree with you. So fit for purpose. I can imagine that there's instances where the Neurozone assessment would not possibly be adding value, and the same would go for any psychometric assessment. But I do hear from you is that it can very easily also be used together. I think the fact that it's predominantly development purposes, but then it's nice to hear that it can be applied in group settings. But I think what you said, which is so critically important, we often get clients asking for, asking about, our organization is invested in our people. We want to embark on a wellness campaign. We want to show that we care. We want to, you know, support them in whatever they do. So the intention is there, but often they're not 100% sure where to start. And what I hear from you by the example that you just used was that because of the Neurozone model, it actually incorporates good learning, that it's actually quite sensitive to be asking somebody whether they exercise, whether they meditate, whether they do mindfulness exercises, etc. But that you actually as an organization can invest in well-being or resilience, and do specific campaigns related to whether it's rhythms or whether it is whatever it might be, that's more focused but proven to actually make a difference. So it's not only a wellness campaign, it's a focused campaign directed to needs. So no, that's brilliant. We did have a question from Catherine asking whether it's a psychological construct. Etienne, I do see your finger.
Oh, I didn't want to answer that question necessarily, but I suppose I can, and then Marina is welcome to correct me. Very briefly, if you ask whether it's like psychological assessment, it's an assessment of, it's a assessment on behaviors, which basically means that you don't have to be health professionals council certified or registered to actually debrief, for example, a person who uses the assessment. That's actually a great advantage, you know, in this current world, because, as I said, it does not actually really have that kind of information that requires health professionals council certificate. What's the word? To create that, I suppose, registration. Yes, yeah. Marina, are you happy with that answer?
Yeah, I can maybe extend on that a bit, because we've made very sure, I think from a South African perspective, Catherine, we are not obliged or you know, to register assessments anymore with the Health Professions Council, and we opt not to do that because, as Etienne says, it then actually limits the use of the instrument, and it is not a purely psychometric instrument in the sense. You know, if you talk about psychometric instruments, it usually measures personality or cognitive abilities, and the Neurozone assessment does not do that. So the second reason is that we wanted to open it up to more people, but it is psychometric, and I'm going to say it in quotes, because it complies to the same rigor of the scientific and the standardized method in which the assessment was developed. And I think that is, you know, the spirit of the law. If you look at the Health Professions Act, is that the instruments must be valid and reliable. It must be measuring what it measures and fit for the purpose that it's being done. And from that perspective, all the research you know, confirms that. So I almost want to say it is a psychometric instrument because of its psychometric properties and the rigor about that, but it's not measuring a psychometric construct like personality and cognitive ability. So that's why we didn't register it, and we don't advertise it as a psychometric instrument. It is, and like Etienne said, it's to be used for development purposes and for support of individuals, not for clinical diagnosis or, you know, any clinical use. But because of the nature of the construct and because of the research that backs it up, it can I will feel comfortable and confident to, when I see a very low resilience score, say to a person, I recommend that you take more intervention than maybe just come for coaching, and that you go and see someone professional for.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I'm very keen to try it out. No, thank you very much.
And Catherine, you're an expert when it comes to assessments as well. Would love your feedback on it. And also you'll see the report itself is really user-friendly. I think it's easy to understand. However, I, for example, myself will definitely go for certification due to that. I think you can really only get the most value from it when you really know the theory, better, which is I think the idea of certification. So no, thank you, Catherine, for that question. We had another question related to whether it is aimed for adults, or is there any developmental thoughts around children, and what ages does it range, or aimed at?
Yanni has already actually answered in the chat.
Oh, have you? Sorry.
Yes, but just very briefly. So absolutely,
yes.
we have currently the two assessment forms, the web-based assessment as well as the app, which we are now launching today here with JVR, is for 18 years and older. And as I said, we've already got a 3-minute adapted 3-minute resilience assessments for adolescents 16 to 18 years old, and there's a continuous process in the background ongoing. So as we said, watch this space. This is just the beginning, hopefully, and we're working towards more and more populations. I have to, can I just grab one moment here, because I think it is so important to say it. I wanted to say it the previous time already, but thank you. Here we go. So, Yanni, I think what's important to just mention to everyone is that while the assessment assesses behaviors, and it has got an analytics and a behavioral component that's very important, we should not underestimate the importance of the learning part of what is in the report that actually provides you with micro learning components and insights. Now, learned resilience is a brand new term, but of course for old thing, because we actually build resilience through learning. We build resilience through insights, and coaching individuals and groups has a great advantage here to actually support their coaches and their clients through learning, using micro learning, using specific videos and other components and podcasts that are available that you can actually use in the report with your clients and coaches to help them to build the resilience through learning. So don't forget the other horse of the cart when it comes to resilience, which is the learning piece. But that's also quite bad.
I want to add here, because I think I didn't mention it when you asked me how is the Neurozone assessment different. First of all, just the PDF reports provides a huge amount of resources to support this learning that Etienne is about. On the last page, for instance, there are links, to videos that start introducing people to this brain-body connection and how resilience is viewed from a neuroscience perspective, etc., etc. And then when you use the app, there's actually a whole library of learnings and podcasts and videos, to help people understand. Simultaneously, I think the value of the training may be also for coaches and people who want to use it to simplify this for the person that's sitting on the other side. Because what we found in the past is the instrument works very well for people who are interested in new things, who are open to learning about the brain, who's not intimidated by the word neuroscience. It does not work that well when people feel overwhelmed by thinking they need to know all about the brain before they can use this instrument, and that's not true. You don't need to know, you don't need to be a neuroscientist to be able to use the instrument effectively. It helps you to understand why you are doing what you're doing. Because for me, and if I can circle back again to, why I gravitate towards it, it gave me a new lens and a different lens, in addition to all the other lenses that we learn being psychologists and psychometrists and coaches to look at behaviors. It gave me a neuroscience lens to understand behavior and to then plan and advise clients on how to adjust behaviors to more healthy options. So training is very practical in simplifying it, but still giving you all the resources that's necessary for your own learning and then for your clients' learning.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Marina, in terms of this, and the same goes to me. After reading the report and reading up a little bit on the assessment as well, it's richening your view. It's not narrowing. It's not excluding what you're currently doing. It's actually just enhancing. And many of the things that's captured is stuff that we know, that we tend to say to our kids and that we know about ourselves. So it's not everything. I mean, there's a lot new, but it's just now captured in one, and it just helps to summarize. And also it doesn't come with the complexity, which helps, because neurology and neuroscience has never been something, not my strong point. So no, I absolutely agree with that. I do see that we are 2 minutes behind, or after 5, and I do want to stop here for a second and say, Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Etienne and Marina, and thank you for everybody attending as well. We're really excited about this partnership. You will see that we are working hard to further the research that they have already done. To your point, Etienne, I think that there's going to definitely be collaboration on the interaction of personality and the picture that you drew with the house, how it impacts on one another, and how we can work together from a coaching stance as well to actually support the development, the resilient development for people going, using the assessment as well. So I think you all have received some of the information with regards to certification. I'll definitely also be joining on the 14th of March, and I think then we can extend the practical application of this tool as well. Marina, I've got millions of questions related to how it's being used and how do you do that and what's next and how do you keep accountability? How do you get managers to buy into it so that you can actually increase the performance, Etienne? So there's so many more that we need to talk about, but I think for now, let's just say we're excited about this journey. It's a start. It's definitely not an end, and we'll likely have more events where we can pull Etienne together with Marina and talk about interesting topics. So again, thank you very much.